Emmanuel, I think we should get started.
Hey, thank you, Jide. Want to welcome everybody to this webinar, A Case for Enterprise Architecture in Banking, because my name is Emmanuel Williams, and I'm here with Jide Sowade, my managing director. Just a bit of an introduction now. I'll introduce myself, and of course, I'll let Jide introduce himself as well. I'm an enterprise architect with TriVersa and basically specialize in the banking and telecoms environment. I've spent the past few years working basically in helping organizations to adopt and to mature and operationalize enterprise architecture within their environment. I've done that with a number of banks. And I'm also very much involved in delivering solutions from a technological point of view. The whole objective in having this webinar is really helping organizations, the various enterprises out there, especially banks, making a good case for why enterprise architecture should be used to drive a number of the strategic initiatives within the bank. We hope that you'll find the whole session very interesting and engaging, and we'll be really looking forward to your questions. Thank you. Jide, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to do a brief introduction. So thank you everyone for attending this webinar. My name is Jide Sowade, the MD for TriVersa Solutions Limited. TriVersa effectively started about 5 years ago, just 6 years now when we started. Our focus really is around helping large enterprises to drive value from their technology investments that they make. That includes from helping them to think about the big picture, the enterprise as a whole, and also we get in solutions specifically that drives the agenda in which they set for themselves. My background in this particular topic goes back as far back as 2005, or 2007, 2005, even earlier than that a bit. Even earlier than that, actually, my foray started within architecture, enterprise architecture, well, technical architecture. Then I did some roles prior to starting TriVersa. I worked as an enterprise architect in various capacities for many banks. But I also have a mixture of experience around actually business itself, so managing businesses, projects, managing enterprises, how business works. And 6 years ago when we started TriVersa, the focus really is around helping to put together those wealth of knowledge around how to make technologies work for a large enterprise. Our definition of enterprise is any organization that effectively has maybe 500,000, 1,000, 10,000 people working within that towards a common objective, towards driving some agenda. The agenda could be, of course, a mixture of things, could be profitability, could be products and services launch, could be improving the way their current operations run. So we know enterprises have those kind of agenda to make, to deliver on, and they require enterprise architecture to help to drive that kind of agenda for them. Now, if you ask the average organization, whether it's in banking or telecoms or any other organizations, even if they don't have anybody employed in the enterprise architect role, they actually do have an enterprise architecture running within the organization. So they have an enterprise architecture which consists of a set of infrastructure and systems and processes on how they do things within the organization. They may not actually have had a structured pattern around. Sorry, they may not have a structured pattern around enterprise architecture, but they do have some kind of leverage on that. So I think with this webinar, we want to try and address specifically the case for enterprise architecture in banking. And we want to kind of do this in a very, very short time frame, just an hour, for 45 minutes to do effectively the intro into the enterprise architecture as a framework, but also to talk about some of the agenda around how to ensure that EA is seen as a case for banking, is seen as a relevant case that should be executed in the banking environment. So I would like to, Emmanuel, to pretty much start that conversation. We would like it to be, we would introduce some questions from polls from time to time. Please respond to those polls. It helps us to understand how you're finding this particular topic or what other topics we may find in the future. So please, we ask that you please answer those polls. So I think, Emmanuel, without taking too much time, we only have 45 minutes. You would first of all do the first self-session of the description around case for enterprise architecture, the argument for it. then I'll hopefully when at the end I'll get some few minutes to round off by introducing some other concepts around the topic. So thank you, Emmanuel, and over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Jide. Our first set of polls is already up, and we really appreciate if you can help us quickly do that in 1 minute. Just answer the question: how familiar are you with the concepts of enterprise architecture? I think you could just do that very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, they can do that while you carry on, Emmanuel.
So while that you're doing that, I'm just going to go on with the presentation. Thank you. Okay, because today we will be looking at some of the industry trends, challenges, and drivers. We'll be looking at various imperative of digital transformation and AI as an enabler, redefining enterprise architecture value propositions, and basic architecting for agility, innovation, resilience, and sustainability, and tooling for EA performance. I might talk about quite a number of other things along with that, but I think those are the core things we want to address. What has happened? Where are we today? I think every one of us are very much in the COVID, what do we call it now? In the COVID state of things, if we want to say that. COVID is everywhere. And there is absolutely no conversation we can have today that can ignore that reality. And the impact on business as a whole can never be overstated. And it has impacted the whole way we do things, socialize, the way we work, commute. It has completely disrupted some industries. Retail is suffering. Retail, hospitality, travel industry. And we're talking about different paradigms today. A lot of us have been working from home for the past 9 months, and you're talking home learning and such other things like virtual parties and congregation and what have you. And so in the light of that, where does it put the banking industry, as it were, in terms of key drivers? We know that today, some of the drivers for the banks for 2021, looking forward, will be, given the pandemic and what we have experienced, how do we maintain liquidity going forward? Because quite a number of policies have come up, given all the challenges that the industry has suffered. I think the major interest for the banks and for almost any enterprise is how do we ensure that the inflow continue to outweigh the outflow? How do we maintain operational efficiency is also a major concern for us. Of course, if you want to maintain liquidity, you will be concerned about how efficient you are running things within the organization. Of course, operational efficiency has always been important for banks. We want to reduce costs. And you want to ensure that you're making good profit. But COVID-19 has completely thrown that, made that even far more important. Operational risk is now a very real issue. And of course, the digital drive. Prior to COVID-19, digital transformation was like a buzzword almost everywhere. But for the banks, it was real. But given what has happened, we can say that digital transformation or the digital drive is really just beginning. Now, in the light of those drivers or key drivers for us, we're dealing with some major challenges around, when you talk about regulatory risk, you're talking about foreign exchange volatility, you're talking about cybersecurity, which is, during this pandemic has really being accentuated, should I say, really being accelerated or increased in terms of the level to which what you call hackers or what have you have tried to take advantage of and exploit the situation to further exploit people. And that is a major concern. And of course, when you talk about the digital drive, the technology infrastructure, practically all technology infrastructure have been truly stressed during this COVID-19 era. And what are the mega trends we are seeing given COVID-19 and looking forward. Like we've said, digitization is being accelerated. Workforce virtualization is being accelerated. Safety concerns and being able to survey and track the way people move around has become even more important. Corporate responsibility. Now we see organizations trying to define themselves in terms of a purpose. We see a lot of advertisement and broadcast where organizations are trying to resonate around a particular purpose, just beyond what the business, just business. And of course, you're seeing all sorts of ecosystems being formed and created. And of course, there is a huge focus on cost reduction. Some of the things that maybe are decelerating are the sharing economy, which the general thinking is that it has come to stay. Maybe that is decelerated a bit. In Nigeria, maybe the context might be a bit different. Urbanization is also decelerating around the world. The general thinking before was that you have to be in the cities to be able to work, to be able to deliver value. But by the time you look in the context of digitization and working from home, then you suddenly realize that it's not about it's not about where the work is done, but value you're able to add. And so then you see that people are more accommodating of, okay, employing people who are not necessarily working in the environment in which the value is necessarily being delivered. And so it doesn't really matter where you're working from. And then you then have challenges with people building offices all over the place and then people not taking up those spaces anymore. Why? Because, well, people are working wherever they live. Of course, the global movement of people and goods have also been challenged, is also being challenged. It doesn't mean that these things will go away. It's just that they have decelerated a bit. And of course, there is all likelihood that they will also get back into the norm, depending on how things change. Now, in terms of trends for the banks, now for the banking industry, we've said, COVID-19 is accelerating digital transformation. Cybersecurity risk response is now very important. Stricter regulatory policies. Cloud adoption is now key. Part of the things that organizations realize is that in having to then make a lot of people work from home within a very short time period, we then see how the VPN infrastructure that we usually rely upon when you have to do maybe work off-site once in a while now has to be the norm. And then we see that this infrastructure actually being stressed and being challenged, and you suddenly realize that, oh, this VPN infrastructure was not developed necessarily for this kind of usage, once in a while usage, but and then cloud adoption really becomes a necessity. Of course, usually the concern has always been around security and ownership of data. Well, all that is now really being questioned, and we're talking about private cloud and hybrid clouds to resolve such challenges. Of course, things like technology, adoption of new technology is also we continue to see the acceleration of robotic process automation, AI and machine learning, blockchain, distributed ledger technology, has come to stay, and we're seeing new ways of delivering old service using this technology. Of course, disruptive methodologies like Agile, DevOps, and lean management are now completely essential. We just have to find a way to adopt and incorporate these things into how we work. And then, of course, we are now seeing increased focus on environmental and social sustainability, climate change, social inequality, financial inclusion are subjects that are almost every time you listen to the news are being discussed. You talk about Black Lives Matter, you talk about all those things. Now, we can't ignore all those things anymore. And the question is, how will this impact the way we work going forward? Digital transformation has become an imperative. We cannot ignore it anymore. It has come to stay, and it has accelerated. And we just must find a way to make sure that it is actually the way we work. just like maybe in time, I mean, back in the day, e-commerce used to just be a function of a business. But now for some organization, e-commerce is actually how they work. Likewise, IT used to just be a function. Now, in terms of when you talk digital, IT must be seen as a product that is consumed digitally or using digital channels in order to develop or to deliver or create business value. So we cannot, I mean, the digital has come to stay is really what we'll be talking about. And if we look at the Nigerian context, of course, part of the challenges that some of the outlook originally was that, okay, this year that organizations will be challenged based on the policies that are being made in terms of currency liquidity and in terms of depressed oil prices and the global pandemic. But I mean, what we've observed is that we actually did see some banks making good profit in spite of this pandemic. And how have they been able to do that? Because they have been able to innovate and leverage a lot of their digital infrastructure. Yes, those infrastructure were stressed, and but then, I mean, we have seen the art of what is possible. I remember, I mean, sometime earlier this year, I was sitting in an office, in a meeting, and we were, I mean, discussing with business as to some of the things they wanted to do and the speed at which they want it done. They want these solutions yesterday. And of course, typically the IT or the technology team would tend to be, oh, these things take time. Oh, we will need some months to plan. We will need some to plan these things out. But given the speed at which we needed, I mean, organization needed to actually change to be responsive to COVID-19, CEOs are saying, look, we can actually move faster. And honestly speaking, the rate at which things are done or the rate of change will never be slow again. So most of the CEOs, most of the organizations, and chairmen have seen that, oh, things can actually move fast and they can deliver value at a very speed rate. And as such, as far as they are concerned, they are locking into that. They are not going back. So if we can do this thing during this crisis, then it means that, oh, we can actually walk this way. And as such, the pressure is really going to be enhanced on all domains, both business and technology, to actually be more responsive in the way we carry out our engagement. So in the light of that, I mean, we then come home to the real conversation of today. What is enterprise architecture and how does enterprise architecture actually help to deliver this value? I don't know, Promise, if you want to share the result of the poll, I think it would be good. It would be a good time to have a look at that. So 6% of the participants say are knowledgeable, which is a small number. 33% says they are knowledgeable enough and currently apply some of the concepts at work, which is good. 28% passively knowledgeable, not currently applying any of the concepts at work, and 33%. So basically, 33% have little or no knowledge. So we can at least say that about 60% of the people, at least more than 60% of the people in this webinar are indeed knowledgeable. So we don't really need to spend too much time defining enterprise architecture. But for those who are probably new, basically, we see enterprise architecture or architecture, first of all, as basically the structure and the components of the components of a system and their interrelationships, and how those components evolve over time, as well as the principles that guide their design, and as well as the way they will evolve. You can look at architecture basically from, if you look at how we build a house, even though that's not necessarily a good example, but a house basically consists of various building blocks. And So we then see an enterprise from that point of view, from a system point of view, made up of various building blocks and components that are interdependent, that are interacting, and as such, then delivering value. A good example or a good metaphor I like to use to look at enterprise architecture today is the human system. When you look at all the various organs and how they all work together, and then you know that even if you cut your nail and you accidentally cut a bit of your skin, you will feel the pain practically everywhere. So it's not just your toe that will hurt. Every part of your body actually will be hurting. And I think that's the way we should look at it as an enterprise in this day and age, especially when we consider digitalization of the entire enterprise. Then we begin to see that almost every component, almost every function of the enterprise are actually interacting. And then which causes us to move away or to redefine how we actually look at enterprise architecture beyond maybe as a function, but to actually see it as the way we actually do business. Now, from a technology point of view, practically like Jide has noted, every enterprise has an enterprise architecture. The question is this a good fit for you? Is that the right architecture, enterprise architecture you should be adopting? And in the light of that, we're saying beyond the practice or beyond the standards, enterprise architecture should no longer be a discussion for technology anymore. I mean, it is actually the entire business. So we are talking about bringing architecture to the entire enterprise. And so we'll be talking, so we are talking about architectural thinking, or thinking from an architectural point of view in the entire business. So both the business domain or the technology domain must actually adopt enterprise architecture as a thinking pattern as to how we address problems or communicate. So we're now talking about communicating from a building blocks point of view and seeing the entire building blocks that make up delivering value, which is the ultimate thing. And of course, when you're looking at it in that light, we also note that there are various concerns. There are business concerns, there are organizational concerns, there are technology concerns. And what we are saying is that those concerns should not be compartmentalized anymore. Those concerns have to spread across the entire enterprise. So the technical person must be able to interact with the business person in terms of what matters to them, and vice versa. And we believe that enterprise architecture actually provides a means for that communication to happen. So if we talk about how we redefine the value proposition of EA in a high-speed digital age. Of course, we'll look at some of the dysfunctional things that we have had to address. One, the speed of change means that market conditions are changing faster. Customers are demanding more, and their demands are changing faster. Threats and opportunities are also changing very quickly. You talk about VUCA or volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity of the entire environment. Ultimately, or should I say, in the past, in the way we work, we've found that we've built quite a number of silos. We're talking about functional silos. You have development silos in that area. You have data silos. You have the strategy people and the architectural people doing their own thing. And of course, because there are so many silos, we also then see quite a number of conflicts. You have the EA versus the agile parties. You see the business people on one side and the technology people on one side. You have the products and the compliance people on one side. But we're saying that can't continue, really, because we all need, the whole enterprise, there needs to be complete collaboration between the various domains And we begin to see definition of the enterprise or the way the organization are structured around products, specific products or value streams, which is basically the end-to-end actions we will take to deliver from the point of conceiving a product and launching that product, and to the point where a customer does order that product and that product gets delivered. So we begin to think in terms of value streams. We begin to think in terms of business capabilities to be able to deliver on those value streams. And as such, that becomes a language that both technical people and the business people can both understand. So we're not talking jargons anymore. We're actually talking in terms of the product and the value streams around, we might say, the development value streams and the operational value streams to actually ensure that we do gain value. And as such, the role of enterprise architecture, of course, then changes and of course evolves. And of course, we are saying that enterprise architecture is actually in a good position to help us bridge that gap between the technical people and the business people. And as such, if we are talking about architectural thinking that cuts across the entire enterprise, then of course, a lot of perceptions around architecture will need to change. Of course, in the past, enterprise architecture have been seen as being too far off and way too high level from where the action is really happening. That command and control approach wouldn't really work anymore. People have, in a way, spoken against architecture because we're demanding for long-term plans that are planning about 2 to 5 years into the future. Today, the future is like, I mean, maybe, in fact, tomorrow or 3 months down the line, you really cannot really necessarily say what's going to happen, especially when we're talking about COVID-19. I know that this year, a lot of the plans and strategy for 2020 flew out the window practically even before the end of the first quarter. So how can we be thinking about planning 5 years down the line? And of course, so a lot of the architectural governance models were also considered not suited for flatter organizations that actually demand autonomous teams where they're able to choose, that various teams are able to choose how they want to work, how they want to deliver that solution, the methodology or the tools or technology they want to use. Of course, that all this perception of enterprise architecture had previously prevented enterprise architecture from delivering on the promises it had actually it has made. But that needs to change. And we are saying, and we're actually evangelizing that the whole business, or the whole enterprise actually needs to have a common set of overarching goals and principles that they are all driving at. And we're saying it has to be enterprise agility, innovation, resilience, and sustainability. I mean, that really needs to be the focus that for all aspects of the enterprise. So if we go and try to look at these principles or these goals in a much more in detail, because we are not going to spend too much time on them, but just to to touch on them a little, so that we can then understand how to make that case, to the board, make that case at that high level, because that is really what we are preaching, that how do we ensure that architecture really can deliver value? We are saying that if we're going to be a digital organization going forward, and if we're going to be responsive to what the market is demanding and what, then it means that we must be agile as an organization. We must be agile as an enterprise. We must be agile in practically all the things that we are doing as an enterprise. And we are saying that EA actually has that capability to enable that agility across the organization? How do we create and build the necessary agile organizations around which value will be delivered? Of course, one of the things that research has exposed to us is that the way an organization is structured actually determines the kind of products they produce. For instance, if you have a tightly coupled organization where a lot of things are, what you might say, a lot of things are broken down into functions and what have you, the kind of product that you will produce will be really monolithic. But when you have an organization that is loosely coupled, then you see that the services and the product that they do produce are more modular, which is far more, should I say, responsive to change and reduces complexity. And as such, the idea of an agile enterprise and EA helping us to build those loose coupling within how we are structured, how we build those teams, those autonomous teams, is really important. And then, of course, how we plan for the various developments that those agile teams will want to come up with. So the focus then changed to an agile enterprise architecture that then focuses, rather than all this current and target enterprise architecture that are looking too far into the future, then we focus a lot more on intentional architecture and building architectural runways on which that allows us to plan out and evolve how we do the development. What am I getting at? Now, that rather than architecture team, in fact, there is no architecture team anymore. Not an architecture team, we're saying the architect is now an architecture thinking that spreads across the entire organization. Now, the chief architect or the people or the architecture office now becomes more or less a steward of the various assets that we are bringing, that we are producing, helping to maintain that estate, but they are not necessarily just sitting far away over there in some ivory tower and speaking down to everybody else, but rather they are more like stewards. So while the architectural team does exist, but they are more like stewards. They own the various, should I say, the management and maintaining the various artifacts we are producing, and they facilitate how, we say, the various, what do you call it now, application or technology that we have deployed to enhance that environment. Rather than then so governance comes closer to where delivery is actually taking place and the people who really understand the subject, or should I say the subject matter itself. And so governance is not too far away, and as such, control and as well as the ability to evolve the development work in fact improved. So we talk about emergent architecture. So there's an intentional architecture as that is a more purposeful statement or model as to what we want to develop. And then, of course, which guides and enables us to evolve based on the changes, or should I say what is emerging within the environment. By imagine, or should we say emergent architecture, we're saying that there will be both desirable and undesirable outcomes due to a complex environment. Of course, the environment the complexity of the environment keeps increasing due to the fact that even the organization is extended now. So you're not just talking about what is internal, you're also talking about external parties, your various partners and what have you. And because of that complexity, there will be emergent outcomes as a product gets into the market. And then being able to respond quickly to those emerging realities is really dependent on the team or the product owners. So teams are then structured along value streams according to a particular product, we are relying a lot more on business capabilities, which enables us to look at, the various functions and roles and responsibilities within the enterprise that would deliver a particular product. So collaboration is enhanced. And then we are talking about journey mapping and what have you. And so the whole architectural, should I say agile architectural outlook actually enables a far better, or should I say a much better methodology for how we deliver value within the organization. I mean, we'll look to have more conversation on this, but I think I've dwelled on that for too long. Now, of course, the next thing, if we're enhancing agility and we're enabling agility, we're expecting then is that the architectural team now focuses on innovation. How does the organization innovate quickly? Now, there's this article, materials out there around the 10 types of innovation. And you talk about, innovation spreads around even in your network, your structure, your process, the product itself, how you engage the customer. We believe that enterprise architecture really needs to be involved in this, and especially because the architectural team already were designed to to be forward-looking, to be able to see the unseen and unmet needs in the market. And then, of course, because they are also forward-looking, they are also able to see the emerging technology that are coming up and that would actually can deliver value. So we are talking in terms of value innovation, and then and then driving that value innovation. Concept like design thinking then becomes some of the things that architecture is actually driving, and also enabling, or should I say, creating the enabling environment that enables the organization to actually evolve and change very quickly, or respond to change in terms of, we reduce the complexity of our technology infrastructure so that the technology infrastructure's complexity doesn't now stifle how quickly we can change or how quickly we can respond to the market. And then, of course, looking at new opportunities or to adopt technology given what is happening in the market. And as such, the EA team really is an innovation team. Resilience, of course, we're talking COVID-19 and everything that has happened, resilience, should I say, or building resilience into our system is, we believe, where EA has actually earned its wage, because the organizations that are actually doing well now, or that have managed to cope, like we said, had a good architecture that could respond to that situation. So, like we've previously said, all organization has an enterprise architecture, whether they are aware of it or not. The key is whether that architecture is a fit, is a good fit for the kind of business that they are into. And we believe that enterprise, and going forward, EA's role will only be in ensuring this resilience will only be enhanced. And it means that in every design, in every development, we are actually looking to ensure that this development is going to be resilient. We ensure business resilience. So things like technical debt and technical health then becomes important. What is technical debt? Of course, because for every product we throw into the market, there's that concern there's always that concern to get it to the market quickly. And so we make decisions and we make choices around the kind of technology we have used, or the kind of, should I say, the processes that we have adopted in actually shipping out that particular product. All that in some ways might leave some gaps, so we might do some trade-offs. And those trade-offs, of course, might create what we call technical debt within the organization, within the particular product or the development. And the key thing, like every debt, if technical debt grows, and you would always want to manage that to make sure that subsequent development work are not then hampered by this technical debt. And that is one role that EA must fulfill in ensuring that we manage our technical debt to ensure the technical health of the environment, because the technical health of the environment, the overall technical health of the environment actually is what helps to maintain resilience. And sustainability, of course, this might be, well, odd for some people, especially when we start to talk about environmental sustainability, climate, and what have you, but it's not anymore. I mean, the question is, shouldn't we be more concerned about sustainability given what is happening today, especially around COVID-19, and then all the noise around climate change and the impact on how we use resources today. And given all the policies and regulations that are being made, while a lot of that might not have gotten, might yet to get to us in Nigeria, but we know that that is where it's going, especially where organizations are now being asked to disclose the climate risk in their investments, especially whether you are investing in organizations that actually have high climate risk of stranded assets or stranded investments. And then there are concerns around low or zero carbon policies that are coming up. And of course, things like carbon ratings, carbon credit ratings that are coming up. All those things are going to be important down the line. And EA must be, is in a good position to help the organization to actually plan towards these things, in ensuring that all our development and in fact, the entire organization actually anticipates the sustainable use of resources in terms of, in fact, from the point of view of how we use energy. Of course, almost all banks have data centers, and how have we structured or designed our data centers? In the future, you will be looking to ensure that your data centers are actually using renewable energy, and of course, which will be key to delivering value. I think the last slide for me is really around tooling for EA, tooling EA for performance. And of course, a lot of things we've been talking about, there are quite a number of tools out there that addresses all those topics. So, I mean, especially from a banking point of view, I've talked a bit about the Agile Enterprise Architecture Framework by the Open Group. You have the digital practitioner body of knowledge that actually helps organizations, or should we say digital enterprises or digital businesses to how do they structure, how do they develop, and then how do you adopt all the new concepts or technology out there to deliver value. I mean, concepts like DevOps, around DevOps, skilled, agile, and what have you that are out there. I mean, these tools actually look at that. These are not exhaustive, of course, but they are part of the things that we believe that organizations or banking as where should be looking at. Of course, you also look at reference architecture, by banking reference architectures, like what Bayern as an organization is doing to help build open banking that can actually then what do you call it, that enhances how banks partner with third parties and around standardization and how they build out services so that you can reduce complexity and what have you. Of course, there are the various collaborative architecture software applications out there, which would now become really essential as we begin to talk about various domains within the business collaborating. Of course, we're going to collaborate better. And I mean, there are software applications and tools that would enhance that collaboration and ensure that the various artifacts that we are producing in the various domains can easily be shared and reused across the various business functions. I think I will stop here and let Jide take over. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Emmanuel, for that wonderful presentation. I kind of picked up a lot of good facts from what you just talked about. I mean, you talked about remote working, resilience, sustainability, the whole financial inclusion model. If you take the context of West Africa, Nigeria, for example, all those things have happened to us in the last few years. And I know the financial inclusion is one of those things, one of those drivers for banks in general as well. So You know, all those things you mentioned are all very, very, very informative and all very, very relevant to the idea of why we think enterprise architecture is important for banking. So can I ask you just to go to the next slide, so I can begin this presentation? So thank you for that once again. I think just for everybody around the table, let me just try and set some context, because I think it's important that we also put ourselves in the shoes of your business, your banking business. Your banking business is intending to do a number of things, really. They're trying to make more money. They're trying to recruit more customers, so they're trying to gain more customer share. They're trying to operate more efficiently. Those are things that are important to them. They will not shy from delivering on that, because, of course, the stakeholder value in which they're trying to establish is around that. So whether you work as an architect, you're technical architect, application architect, data architect, or solution architect, you know, the underlying objective is to meet the business need. And the business need is always evolving. And of course, we've seen in the last 6 months, or say 8 months, sorry, when COVID-19 has landed, and you're all working from home. What has happened there? That means the change has happened. Companies are realizing the value of that. Banks are realizing that, oh, people can work from home. Maybe I don't actually need them all to be turning up in the office. And that means that their model has changed. From the model, the design of their business in December 2019, to by March, that design has changed completely based on what the realities of the market was saying to them. So the change is dictating what the enterprise architecture directions would be. So looking at what I put on this slide really tries to talk about what is important. What are the reasons a bank should need EA? So let's talk about the challenges that banks have. Now, the primary objective of a bank is really to make money and also to meet all the shareholders lender. So Emmanuel talked about sustainability, you know, all those other things that are important to a bank. Well, if you go back to the key things, really banks want to operate to succeed. But the key ingredients to their success is that number one point. They cannot afford to lose their customers. So customers are important. And of course, the data they hold on the customers are important. So if you ask me, is a bank a digital asset now? Yeah, I think it is a digital organization. If it realizes that the two primary things that it needs to survive is the customer and the data. And they have loads of those things, those elements. The problem is that they sometimes don't know how to use it very well. And in some cases, they are now beginning to be threatened by, you know, the likes of the fintech organization. So a bank not looking to lose valuable customers should really look at what EA can offer on that. And I'll talk a bit about that. So EA can really help to avoid losing valuable customers, such as customers and data. And that is something I will describe a bit more. The second thing is, of course, a technical dominated world. So the world has changed a lot now. If you look at where we are, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, there are very little banks, there are very little technical companies, technology companies doing anything significant in the banking sector. It has changed. Elements of the business of banking has been eroded gradually. So, for example, you know, even things like transfer money now, things like you know, opening check accounts. There are all kinds of other small organizations, small bank and technology organizations starting up, looking to fill a void that banks are missing. So how does EA help on that? Well, if you're an architect, really you should be looking to how your bank can do better around the speed. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Now, less customer control in the economy. So if you look at governments typically are any banking in any organization, for example, Nigeria, for example, all banks are mandated to, you know, by the central government, and they keep a tightly lead on what they do. They make sure that their affairs are run properly. And if they're not run properly, they make sure that they go through a supervisory framework. And if they don't, they get to a fair resolution framework. Now, if you think about it, the banks needs to be run successfully, because if there's a problem with bank, it affects the economy as a whole. So central governments of any organization looks to use the banking sector to effectively implement their what they call the financial physical policies for the country. So banks is very important, but that whole matter of banks is also changing. So banks are now realizing, the central governments are realizing that, okay, we can also look at other organizations who may be able to benefit from having a so-called banking license. So they've actually opened up that opportunity to the likes of telecoms organizations. That means the share of the banking market is eroding gradually. So banks need to be aware of that, and they must be doing things to change that. Regulations also is another aspect of that. Regulations are also being built into what we call fintech solutions. So they are coming out of the box with regulated as a service capability. So if you think about it, the threats to banking is evolving. They need special people within the organization to help to understand those threats and how to counter those threats. And that's one of the things that EA really can do very well. Challenges from the age-old banking model. So if you take the average bank, The average bank has a relationship with central government, so it's the last is a deposit organization for the country. Or when you're working somewhere, it's the company, is the organization that helps to deliver your payslip by the end of the month, so they pay all your salaries and all that kind of transfers. But that whole model, that age-old business model, whereby banks effectively act as a payment systems, government insured depositors organization, is changing. So other people, other organizations, other entities, other technology fintech companies are coming in and gradually eroding that market. What can you do as an EA person to help to change that? And the last on my list here is the threat from bigger and wider. There are some big technology companies out there now who are actually now not necessarily playing in the same old field. They're not kind of staying in their region. They're looking to go globally. So as an architect, really your responsibility is really to really do better. If you look on the diagrams here, what I've tried to describe here are effectively the fact that if you don't look after your data, you don't create new opportunities around your data, and you don't look after your customers, somebody else will take the customer from you. As an EA, you really need to understand your bank's data, understand what's capable within that data, and expose that to your management so that they understand how to derive additional value. If you're not, that's the value they're looking for. It's EA able to help us resolve those kind of areas of problems that we have. And when we start to talk about that language to any executive in a bank, if you can speak the language of the problem, the language of the risk and opportunities that they face, and you can provide measures to deliver that, that's how EA can add value. So really, if I was in a position to talk to anybody in any leadership context in a bank, I know that these questions are things that they're looking for answers for. As an EA, if you understand how these problems impact the bottom line profitability of those banks, you should be able to kind of help them move forward. So can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Next. Now, so I mentioned those 5 points. If you think about those 5 points, really, what can we do to resolve it? I think the slide's not showing very well. I think, Emmanuel, if you take it to the non-readable mode, and then just make it a full screen, just expand it so that we can see it.
Okay.
Yeah. So just make it, take off your left hand, please. Yeah, take off the left hand navigation so we can see it properly. Yeah, it's not been displayed very well on the screen.
Is it?
No. Take it back down. Sorry, it's not.
Okay.
Take it back down a bit. Yeah, but okay. I think I apologize for these, but you can't see the 3 items that I said on that. Now, for those 3 areas that we know that banks need to address, we know that EA can help. We know that EA, the right EA team working organization can help to identify what smarter alliances the bank should have in place towards driving the value agenda they make. Now, that smarter alliance could be, for example, partnering with a fintech solution to provide additional layer of services. And I've seen some banks in West Africa doing that already, reaching out to fintechs and saying, here are some APIs or things you can integrate with. EA helps in that kind of function, helping to design the right infrastructure solutions that would help to drive the agenda of the business forward. So I think it's important that is put into context as a responsibility of the EA. So addressing those gaps that I've got on this list are the things that are responsibility of the EA team. Beyond all the things that Emmanuel mentioned, if you can tap into understanding the gap that your enterprise faces, especially as it relates to the value that the business is trying to obtain, you're in a position to really do better. I think that's primarily is the thing here about enterprise architecture. The role itself, it really comes down to, yeah, sorry, can you move forward one step? The role itself really helps to drive that agenda. So Emmanuel has mentioned the fact that, of course, we can work with a data architect and application architect. Now, I've kind of looked at those and said, okay, if we were to put all those things that an enterprise architecture team should be doing for a bank, what should it be? If you look at those things on the right, on the left-hand area, those are measures and challenges that banks face. They want to ensure they move away from local offices operating models. So banks have buildings, they want to do with that idea and move to a more mobile mechanism. If you take the fact that COVID has happened, if you take the fact that people are now recognized they can work from home, that means that banking should be delivered online, can be delivered remotely. So local offices operating model is a thing of the near past. So banks should be looking to do that, and as an architect, you should be able to come up with models that would help them to implement better reaching mechanisms going forward. Geographically based service models. So many banks are okay operating in one country. If you look at where some of the fintech solutions are now, they're looking to effectively move beyond their local into what you call regional space and into national, so regional and into, even worldwide opportunities they're looking to kind of invest their energy on. So as if you're working in the bank, you should be talking to your bank around how do you move them into that paradigm where they are not just operating in one country, but even operating in regions or even across the globe. And how do you do that? Technology helps to drive that. As an EA, as an architect, as an enterprise architect, your responsibility really is to drive that kind of change to help people understand how that would work. Unused data. If you go to the average bank, banks have loads and loads of data, and they struggle to use that well. The architects in an organization should be able to kind of look at some of that data and look to use that to provide insight, provide platforms upon which insight could be found to improve the way that business is actually run in the bank. Managing valuable customer relationships. If you don't manage your customers, they'll go elsewhere. For example, if a bank is charging 100 naira for a transaction, and somebody can start up a fintech organization that will charge 60 naira, you'll be amazed that some customers will move on to that model. So that knowledge of what customers needs are, when customers are in difficulty, to them, you've got what their data is. For example, when they were paying a lot of money into their account, they're paying less now. And working as an architect, understanding the business of the bank, and knowing what the customer is trying to achieve, and coming up with models, coming up with platforms, coming up with systems, coming up with joined up processes that will let them attain that. So Emmanuel, please go back. One slide, thank you. So responding to regulation is important. Without regulators, bank gets into difficulty. So regulation is really important to banking. Joined up regulation processing should be what we not buying siloed systems. So if you work in a bank where they've got 10 systems for fraud, anti-money laundering, risks, for credit risk, market risk, you should be advising them differently. That's the role of an EA. How can I help them how can I help them to observe regulation and reduce costs? Emmanuel mentioned about reducing costs. How can I, as an EA, help them to do that, leveraging technology? That's part of the responsibility. So in some way, with the technology layer, as an EA, that's your responsibility. But I think getting closer to what the business is trying to achieve is also paramountly very important. So, and these are some of the factors that I think are very, very valuable as an EA, as a responsibility of an EA person. Now, the case for EA for me is so. I mean, if you go to any large enterprises, some of them are already very well invested in EA. But what sometimes missing is how the EA connects to the overarching objective of the organization. In most cases, the organization has an agenda to meet. If you take the fact that any large organization have goals and have vision and goals, and vision and goals translate to strategies, and those strategies and translate to capabilities. How do you ensure the responsibility for ensuring that your goals, the enterprise vision goals and strategies are met is through the capabilities that you're launching, and technology underpins those capabilities. How do you ensure you have the dotted lines to those capabilities that the bank is needing? And how do you communicate the value of what you're offering in that? That's the responsibility of the EA. So what I've just done on this slide is to kind of provide a map over the problems that we saw earlier on that banks are facing, and try to define how the responsibility of the EA team should be focused on those problems. Now, if you're in a bank, your measures and challenges may be different, but there's nothing wrong with doing this kind of mapping to ensure that you understand how the teams that you're going to be putting together as an EA would help to address those challenges. Please, the next slide. Okay, I think the important thing I want to try and take out of this slide is really to talk about the entire long-term value an organization is trying to face. If any large bank really needs to be looking at having an enterprise architecture team in place, but the enterprise architecture team have to understand the responsibility that they hold towards ensuring the bank is successful. Now, the responsibility of the bank is, if you take it from a vision point of view, it may be that the bank has decided to make some investments in, to make a set of investments in new in banking as a digital banking service. They may look into evolve into that. Is the responsibility of the EA team to draft out the plans how that would attain. They need to understand how the technologies will work in that case. They need to be able to put together a technology strategy plan. They need to also be able to kind of define the roadmap for how that technology will be evolved going forward from where they currently are to the future. That's the responsibility. But the measures are important. The reasons why sometimes EA struggles in some banks is because they're not clearly able to articulate the measures that the value of what they're bringing on board will deliver to the organization, to the bank. And that's what's usually missing. Some EA organizations, some EA in many banks operate at a technology layer only. They lose focus of the business agenda. That business agenda turns out about there's 3 layers about that. One is the vision of the business. Knowing the visions and goals of the business is primarily important. The second thing is knowing the strategy of how the business wants to deliver that. And that engagement on that strategy is going to be very important for the EA person involved. Or the EA team involved in that. And of course, the capabilities. And that capabilities drive the value the business is trying to attain. So as an EA, you need to be familiar with those 3 areas of your responsibility. You need to ask for those plans. The organization might not have it, but in some cases, you might be only in a position to draft elements of that plan in reality, based on your own knowledge of what you've found out in the industry. So some research work is your responsibility. Some knowledge of how to effectively communicate the measures and the values of your solutions you're looking to put in place is your responsibility. And how this whole solution will hang together, which is the enterprise capability. How do the systems all hang together, evolve together? How do you manage the involvement of that? And to be honest, any bank now is looking to change their operating model. They're not looking to have a fixed operating model as they had in the first 300 years. They're now looking to have a more dynamic operating model, which effectively they'll be able to change their model in reality of what they find in the market. Take, for example, what's happened in the last 12 months across the globe. The whole COVID-19 scenario has prevented many banks from executing their the end of the year plans. They're now having to re-strategize and think differently. And many banks are now recognizing that the need to evolve is their primary response. They need to have that capability to evolve. And that's really the whole notion of an enterprise architect, is knowing how to manage the involvement of an enterprise, how the things are hanging together, making sure that as the business evolves, new business paradigms are formed, new alliances are found with partners, new customers are being sought. They need to have the capability in the organization to make that happen. I believe that's is really my conclusion in this. Can I please ask you to go to the next slide? Our recommendation really, I know there's been a few questions raised. We'll try and answer some of those questions now. How many minutes do we have? Maybe about 2. Yeah, we're running 5 minutes late, but
yeah.
So, well, should we take the question before I complete my recommendation?
Yeah, I think we should take some of those questions. There are quite a number of interesting questions I would like us to take live while we still have most people here. One good question here, and there are 2 questions, but they are related like that. Here's from your experience, what path would you typically recommend for an organization starting out on an EA journey? To start off with a tool to help guide and structure their maturity journey, or postpone tool implementation and focus on maturing the EA capability first, and then include a tool later?
So the first thing is, have you come up with a business case for EA? That's the very first thing. What's the business case for EA? So that could be a 3-4 page document that says, here's why EA is important. That's the first thing. Now, the next thing is to now put together, look at the internal capability of the organization and say, where are we? What people do we have? What skills do we have to actually do EA? Now, that would need maybe in some cases of skilling certain people. That might be training. That might be also hiring new people to join the organization. And then, of course, now identify. And when I was talking about identifying the responsibility of the EA team early. Identify the responsibility early. Identify what the business really wants to attain. Know it. Go back to your MD. Go back to your directors. Understand what the drivers are for them. And that's the only way you can provide that. That's what I call the path, the journey path to really well. So, I mean, all the things that he mentioned there are also correct in terms of tooling. But I think if you're not clear on why the value is, you would end up becoming 2-3 years down the line, the MD would ask the question, what's the value of this team? And that's usually what happens in some organizations.
Okay. I think one thing we could add to that also, I think there's another question really referring to where architecture should sit within the enterprise. And I think in our conversation, one of the challenges with enterprise architecture is that oftentimes it's sitting in the technology environment. And then, of course, it loses its capability to really influence the organization. If like EA is really going to add value, it really must be sitting in the strategic planning and portfolio management domain, where then it can interact with the C-suite at a much more closer level, and then that, and then of course across the entire enterprise. I don't know if you want to say anything to that, Jide.
I think you're completely right on that. One thing I always say, it's the skill set to be, so when we talk about the EA team, where should it sit? Now, there's typically in a large enterprise, there's usually an enterprise architect role, and that person should be someone that strides between the business and the technology. That person or that office should have a responsibility of engaging with different departments that are leading the planning, the strategy, and the delivery of projects. So if that team or the person has the skills to do that and has the communication and the chatter to make it happen, that would be the best route to doing it. So I don't, yes, I agree that we always end up being in a technology field, but that's because most times the IT team grew out of technology. They're not actually exposed to the objective of the business. You will notice when I was describing earlier on, I kind of went to the business problems. I didn't focus on the IT problem. The IT problem, we can find solutions. That's what the IT people do. They do have solutions ready. But what's usually missing is what are the important things that the business is trying to achieve, and how do I place myself in the path of having that conversation with them early to guide them into how the technology decisions would help them get the value that they're seeking. And that's the thing I think is also important.
Yeah. I think there's another question around how do you respond to the common view that EA capability projects end up as lovely esoteric documents and binders that
yes, I saw that question earlier on, and I thought it was a very interesting question. I think Emmanuel mentioned something about agility. Documenting to death is not the way forward. So let me try and get an example. Let's say your organization is looking to introduce a CRM solution, and then you went about putting together a document. You went and you looked at options around solutions. You looked at the solutions and you made a decision that, okay, this solution will fit your estate because it works within your estate. Those are technical decisions, and you would have a lot of documentation to support that. Those documents are important. They help to guide how you arrive at the decision, but they're not enough to go forward. Now, one document that's typically missing, and which is something that I feel the EA team, and I really feel the EA team should be involved in, is that early measures of what the value will be. So if we put this system in place, in 2 years' time, we recruit another 1 million customers. How would we get the system to do that for us? Those are the questions that business are interested in, and those are the ones that are more relevant to the long-term agenda of the organization, because that's what they're measuring against, and that's what they're measuring the EA team on. Okay, you put the system in, how did we know? It may not be the EA team to bring in the customers, but having a system that are scalable, extendable, supportable, security, those are the things that why the EA team are involved in it. So documentation is important. It's just not the right documentation at the right time is what's most important. I've seen organizations that have no documentation at all, and they get into all kinds of trouble down the line. So the key people that have implemented it have left, and everybody's scratching their heads and saying, well, how did we get here? So some documentation is important, even though sometimes it might be overkill. But the technical documentation are important to understand the technical direction. But the business documentation, which is to do with the business measures, what you call the business value measurement, engineering capabilities of the bit of what you're trying to do, should also be created, and the EA team should be secondary to that documentation as well.
Thank you, Jide. I think I'll just take one last question, and then but we will make sure we send responses to all the questions to all participants. So because we really way off time. Says, how does EA help in interpreting requirements across stakeholders, business, IT management, and the likes? If I just might say something to this, and then Jide, you could, and then wrap up. I think, during my presentation, I talk about the concept of value streams and business capability planning. Really, because if you're looking at the product, if you're looking from a value stream point of view, and EA actually helps with that, okay, how do we what is a product? And really, how do we get it to the market? What are the activities or what are the things that need to be done to actually get it from concept to launch, and from when the customer does engage with it and then gets fulfillment for the services they're actually looking for, then you actually have to look at the end, you'll have to look across the entire enterprise or the various value streams within your enterprise that delivers the particular product you are looking to or service you are looking to present. And EA is actually very good for helping to come up with such products or artifacts, as it were.
Yeah, and Emmanuel, thank you for that. I wasn't sure whether I captured the question well, but I thought he was talking about non-functional requirements, really, because non-functional requirements are very vital.
Interpreting requirements across stakeholders.
Okay, interpreting requirements across key stakeholders. Okay, so yes, and we always talk about this even at TriVersa. We talk about identifying who your stakeholders are early, understanding their viewpoints of what's important to them. So some stakeholders, you need to go to them with really around the long-term vision. So it's always, you have to choose your audience very carefully. Choose what their long-term values are. Go to see them, have a chat with them, but understand it before you go and see them, and be able to describe it. Put the views down in a form that they will buy into it, because it's about buying. If they don't buy into it, then the end product is never useful to them. So, and that's for me, EA really putting the dream together, giving the guidance to the team to say these are the kind of things that you should be collating is also a vital thing to do.
Yeah, thank you, Jide. I think that's the last question. We'll have to conclude here. Really, I think it's been an exciting conversation and discussion. I'm very much appreciate the participation, the questions, and it's really been informative. I think we have one last poll that before we end, just quickly, we would really appreciate if you can help us respond to that. At least that will help us in subsequent webinar.
Yes, Emmanuel, while people answer that, this my last slide is really trying to give people some guidance. I think setting the vision of EA to your bank is vital. Some of these slides that are on here really helps you to explain that in a way that will resonate with your executives. So sell the vision. Explain with numbers. What I mean by explain with numbers is if you're sat on the plane with your MD of the bank and you say to your MD, I can help you recruit another 1 million customers, would the MD not be interested? Yeah. So find the numbers that work for the EA, for your EA function. Use that number to communicate value to your management, and you'll hopefully see some value on that. Invest in training and coaching. We also provide some of that from TriVersa, so should you be interested, we could take that up for you. Leverage support. Manage EA could be an option for you. So what does that mean? You may not necessarily have all the necessary team on the ground to help you, but you may want a team that are more experienced to help you for a period of time. That could be something that you could invest your time in. That might be the best way to upskill your people quickly, but also to ensure that you quickly ramp up on good practice well into when you start your EA journey as an organization. And to be very fair, and I think this is one thing that I always say to companies and organizations, is that the EA function is partly responsible for the change the business is trying to achieve. And I say partly, actually, in some cases, majority, because you're now the transformation king, you're now the evolution manager. I actually think the EA role should be called evolution manager, because you're now in a point where evolution is part of everything. But what you do best as an EA, really, is helping to guide the bank. Take every bank that you work in. The biggest two elements of it is their customers and their data. If they give away their customers, they lose sovereignty in terms of how they want to run the banking operation. You are a very important resource to help to understand how they would retain more customers, keep them, make sure that they're also profitable for them going forward. And you do that through the technologies and the solutions and how those solutions evolve and going forward. You do that within your day-to-day job. So it's important that you take that on board. That number 6 points is very important. And should you be interested, we may be providing some additional webinars on this. So I think you're going to be completing this polls now. We hope to hear from you in a very short time. I think some of these questions we posted, we'll be posting this on our Facebook, on our LinkedIn site as well. So I think we'll take these slides. These slides will be available for download. Promise will probably make it available. I think just send an email for it. We can send you the slides in the PDF format. Should you need to talk to anybody, please do get in touch with us. Emmanuel, thank you.
Everybody. Thank you, Jide. Thank you. Promise. It's been an exciting, very exciting.
Somebody said we missed a question. Tajidin Adineko. What's that question?
I think we have, let me see.
Maybe we'll take that question and then we end up.
There are quite a number of other questions we haven't taken, but I just.
My apologies to the attendee. We are running out of time. We don't want to take everybody else's time today, but please, we would respond to you in a separate email. So please be rest assured that those questions that we've not taken now, we will respond. Okay.
In fact, we'll make sure you have, as part of the included with this slide, you actually get responses to all the questions that were addressed here. That's a promise. Thank you all very much for coming. We really appreciate your participation, and we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar.
Thank you, Manu.
Thank you, everybody.